Hi everyone, greetings from National Skills Network. In our series of conversations on one of the most important topics, today we have a guest from Canada, and this series is about work integrated learning. So I'm very happy to introduce all of you to Dr. Norah McRae, who's the Associate Provost, Co-operative and Experiential Education, Adjunct Faculty Member, Department of Psychology, WACE Secretariat, University of Waterloo. Before I tell our audience more about WACE, Dr. Norah, I would like to welcome you to this conversation and thank you for accepting our invite.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. WACE is striving towards advancing cooperative and work-integrated education globally, and we are happy to have you, Dr. Norah. So let me get started by asking your views on the importance of work-integrated learning globally, because I think today that's something the world needs in a very big way, right?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. I've worked for many years in the field of work-integrated learning, and I continue to be impressed by the outcomes if work-integrated learning is done well. Of course, one of the key reasons why we have work-integrated learning is to help students deepen their understanding of theory and knowledge that they're gaining in classroom. So there's nothing like hands-on learning where you can really appreciate what it is you've been learning in a classroom. So that's, of course, the primary and first purpose of engaging in work-integrated learning as a way to deepen understanding. But of course, because it's that experience is happening in workplaces, there's also the benefit of employability, because applying that knowledge and developing skills that one gains from being in workplaces really does lead to employability outcomes. And we see that all over the place, regardless of the discipline, actually. So there's the deepening of knowledge and there's employability outcomes, which are very important. There's also the benefit to organizations that students work in. It's phenomenal the kind of impact that students can have when they bring their talents and capabilities into organizations and contribute to whatever the organization is engaged in, whether that's an industry sector or not-for-profit sector, public sector. Students bring a lot of tremendous capability and fresh ideas. And I think increasingly in this world of rapid technological change, the idea of students coming into workplaces and learning from the employees there is only part of the equation. What we're seeing more and more and more is that actually those employees are learning from the students because they're bringing their digital skills, they're bringing their new technologies into workplaces and really helping to help organizations adapt even more quickly. So there are a number of benefits on why work-integrated learning is so important, I think, as a pedagogy.
Yeah, so we see that work-integrated learning is important at various levels. And from the Indian perspective, before I hear from you from what's happening in Canada or your views from other countries in the world, I would like to share with you how from school level, in India, we are trying to introduce courses which are probably in the vocational stream so that it creates, it sensitizes the children and then also prepares them for the world of work, helps them transition. This is a relatively new concept here in India. And, making it successful and implementing it is definitely a challenge. So if you look at it from the school level or the higher education level, what would be your suggestions to create a favorable environment for this kind of learning to happen?
Well, when we think about how to create a favorable environment, of course, we think about who are all of the players involved. So we have a quality framework that we use in Canada, which guides a lot of our work. And in that framework, we consider 5 key stakeholders. Okay. Government. There's the institution itself broadly. What are the objectives of the institution? The educators within the institution, students, of course, and then employers or host organizations or whomever you want your students to be engaged with in the external environment. So those are the 5 key stakeholders. And in order to have the conditions so that you can have a really flourishing work integrated learning program, the first step really is to think about what are the goals of those stakeholders. What do they want out of this? What are they looking for as results from programs such as this? And then being able to speak to or address those needs. For example, governments are often very interested in employability.
Yeah.
Employers and host organizations, usually what they're interested in is talent. How can they get the best talent into their organizations? And this is a need that we hear from organizations worldwide. Talent, number one.
Yeah.
Educators want students to be to have more engagement in their studies. That's typically what they're interested in, and be able to see students develop skills that may not happen strictly within the confines of a classroom setting. Institutions are usually interested in recruiting students and retaining students and reputation, as well as attracting resources. And the students themselves are usually interested in opportunities where they can get work, where they can have a career progression, where they can have opportunities to really understand what it is they're studying and what motivates them. So I think it's looking at that very holistic view of who are all the players involved, what are they interested in, and each context is slightly different. And then how can you create conditions where those objectives are being met? Then you're setting the stage for a very healthy ecosystem to support work integrated learning. Work integrated learning is very hard to make work if it's just one staff person off the side of their desk running around trying to make it happen. That's usually what does happen, and that's very difficult for that to happen. So if there's the opportunity, especially when you're starting from fresh, to think about who are all the players, how can we meet all of how can this program speak to all of their needs? And in some cases, for example, with students, you might also be talking to their parents. It may not only be about the student. Right. So what is the family looking for out of this engagement? And how do you set the stage so that they support their child in engaging in something like this? And then once that consideration has been given, then there are all sorts of structural considerations, resource considerations, and programming considerations that need to come to bear.
Yeah, I think it was a very simplified way of putting it together, like the way you told us about the stakeholders, the 5 stakeholders, and also the parents angle that you added towards the end. I was about to tell you about how important the parental angle is, especially in India. Because there are a lot of parents here who have so many dreams with their children, and then also the kind of education and information they have about the emerging workplace, or the kind of education that is needed is very less. So I mean, the key word here is awareness. So they may not be very well aware of why we are proposing work integrated learning, but they are a very important, they form a very important stakeholder. Now, when they all have to interact with each other, in your experience, didn't you come across some kind of a tension? Like, for instance, what is good for, let's say, the society, or what is good for the economy, may not be something the student aspires for. Isn't it? Or what the government wants to do, maybe the industry is not really supporting the government. So in such a scenario, any suggestions? How do we, resolve this, and how do we have patience, first of all, to, go step by step in this direction?
Yeah. Now that's a fabulous question, because there are those tensions all the time, right? Yeah. Different values that underpin what those different stakeholders are after, and different conditions that influence the decisions that they're making too. So you're absolutely right. And I think that what's important is to step back. If one is going to be a leader of a work integrated learning program, step back and think about what are some of the key goals and key driving forces that you have at play in that condition. And I think that the other important piece here, so for us, it's about making sure whatever we do is quality programming. So no matter what the push and pull is from those different stakeholders, that we are very clear about what makes for quality work integrated learning. And we use another frame of reference, which helps keep us on track. And we call that PAIR, P-E-A-R. The P is pedagogy, E is experience, A is assessment, and R is reflection. So pedagogy, we have pedagogy that helps set the students up for success, and also that their experiences link to those learning outcomes that I mentioned right at the beginning, those pedagogical goals. E is for experience. So the experience needs to be meaningful and substantial for it to be really leading to the learning that we want. A stands for assessment. So there's an assessment of learning outcomes, and that can be driven by what the program learning outcomes are, what the overall institutional learning outcomes are. There could be some graduate attributes that governments are looking for. And then R is reflection. There needs to be meaningful reflection, or else these experiences don't lead to learning. So that we use PAIR to guide quality, so that when we have certain stakeholders say, oh, why can't you just do that? And why can't you just do that? We go back to those principles and we say, well, we can, but here are the boundaries. So within that, though, I think the other key piece is being flexible. So that frame, PAIR, lets you do all sorts of things. It lets you have experiences that are in this kind of industry or in this kind of community group. It lets you have experiences that are a certain length of time or not, part-time or full-time. I mean, there are a range of different ways you can operationalize different models that meet the needs of the stakeholders that you have. And I think having a flexible menu is also really key to success, because not every student wants to do this in a certain way. Not every program, academic program, can allow for this kind of experience in a certain way. Not every industry sector wants students in a certain way. So I think that's part of the ability to navigate the often competing needs of these different stakeholder groups. So it's being clear about what your core guiding principles are. And so for us, we use this quality framework, and then being flexible within that to the best of your ability. You can't meet everybody's needs all the time. That's the other thing. But to what goes back to the heart of, okay, what's the priority for you in your program and institution?
Yeah. Okay. The way you have elaborated this sounds so much like what we have in India, which we are trying to implement now from the new education policy called the National Skills Qualification Framework, which was earlier limited mostly to the vocational disciplines, but now it is kind of expanded, and also it's going to be a similar framework is also going to be implemented in the higher education, and it also has the quality element, and I think mobility and also the flexibility that you mentioned. Along with it, it is supposed to work very closely with the credit framework. So I think something similar is also coming up here, so that, like you said, it has to meet the requirements of all the stakeholders in so many ways at the level at which they want. Exactly. Yeah, so I think that's something we will look forward to, and probably our audience can also reach out to you if they need any help in the kind of framework that you discussed just now.
Yes.
Yeah, we can learn from your experience there while we are implementing the new education policy here. You also mentioned about experiential education. So how do you define this? Or is it something that is coming close to gaining experience through work, like we gain experience through apprenticeships, or we get exposure through internships? Is that something connected?
Well, the way I look at it is that experiential education is a large umbrella. And it's experiential education broadly is anything that's hands-on learning, right? So different kinds of problem solving, case-based solutions, working in labs, anything that's hands-on is experiential learning. Now, work integrated learning is a subset of experiential education. And what makes it a subset is that hands-on learning involves a third party. So it's more than the educator and the student. Now there's a third party involved, whether that's a company, an employer, a community agency, whatever that is. And the goals of that experience have to meet the needs of that third party as well. And in effect, the learning is effectively co-created with that third party.
Right.
So if you look at experiential education, just without that in general, it could be a case competition that business students are doing. It could be something that is very much confined to what's going on in a classroom, and it involves the educator and the students with some other information coming in. But once you get to work integrated learning, then there's a partnership going on with an external party. So it's a subset of experiential education, but the roots are the same. You know, it comes from the same philosophy, John Dewey's philosophy about deepening education. It comes from the same place, but it is specific to having that third party, and also to some of the outcomes that do relate to employability and job readiness and the development of skills that relate to career clarity and the kinds of things that not all experiential education will address.
Yeah, this is also connected with the applied learning, isn't it? In a way,
yes,
to some extent. So you're applying it, applying knowledge, and making it like a practical skill and trying to solve some problem, like you said, the case-based learning and things where you are in the real world of work or the real world, right?
Yeah.
So,
and what may or may not be helpful, but in the Canadian context, because we've had this conversation a lot as well, what are we talking about? What does it mean? How do we get clarity and consistency across the Canadian higher ed system? And we have a national association called CEWIL, CWIL. So it's Cooperative Education and Work Integrated Learning Canada. And if your listeners are interested, on that website, we have created a definition both of what we mean by experiential learning or education, what we mean by work integrated learning, and within Canada, there are 9 different models of work integrated learning. So apprenticeships, applied research, cooperative education, practica. So we've laid them all out and we have agreed to what they all mean. And then that lets us understand what we're doing and be able to collaborate effectively across the system. Because as you know, it's hard when everyone's doing different things and no one is really sure what we're talking about. So that's been very, very useful in the Canadian context and may be interesting for your listeners to look at.
Sure. And also we would like to know your work at WACE and the University of Waterloo. You have already mentioned partly, especially, how would you sum it up in a way so that if people are interested from India and they would want to be a part of the network or the organization, how do they do that? Maybe you can share some points on this.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So the World Association is made up of mostly people from different higher ed institutions from across the world who are interested in this work. So specifically work integrated learning, and who are either scholars, because we have a whole research dimension to the community, or our leaders, practitioners who are involved in this work. And we have a membership from all over the world. And what's wonderful about this community is it's people coming together, asking the same questions, very much the same questions that you've just been asking. How can they do this? What makes sense? How can they move things forward? And it's a wonderful way to learn from others about how they've tackled many of the similar problems globally, similar challenges globally, and how to learn from each other and gain that expertise. So it's a terrific community, and it's a very collaborative community, actually, very welcoming. So people can join. We also have a number of events. The next one coming up is in June in Sweden. The focus of that event is for researchers, because we do have also the International Journal of Work Integrated Learning, which publishes a wide range of wonderful research articles specifically about this space, also a terrific resource. And the other thing I was thinking about, as you were talking about the work of the National Skills Network and the policy in India, is we are developing a global quality framework. And we've been going to all of the different national associations and bodies across the globe to look at what their quality work integrated learning frameworks are. I mentioned the Canadian one. There's one in Australia, there's one in New Zealand, UK has one, and other jurisdictions have them. And I think that what you've just been talking about, it would be wonderful for you to look at this global framework we've come up with, see if it makes sense from your perspective. And it could be that you have wisdom and insight to add to that. Yeah. This is a living global document. We want to try and have something to help guide people, especially if they're coming from jurisdictions that have no association at all, but they're trying to struggle through this work and make it work themselves. So WACE is a welcoming community, and it's of like-minded people who are trying to do good work in this space. And I've certainly benefited from participating over the years, and I've learned a lot from my colleagues in all sorts of jurisdictions. So it's been really helpful, and I'd welcome your participation.
Sure, we will pass on this message. And in India, as I mentioned, the government of India has, to follow up with the new education policy, has launched many initiatives. There are many frameworks. Some of them are still in the process of being implemented. Like I mentioned, the NSQF, that is the National Skills Qualification Framework, which is revised, or the credit framework. So many things are coming up, and it's quite an exciting thing to see that a lot of changes are, being pushed for. And as we know, this might take a lot of time, but I know we have, I think, made a beginning. So that's
yeah. And just on that last point, I am the associate provost at the University of Waterloo.
Yeah.
And I'm very privileged to work at a university that's now 65, 66 years old, but right from the very, very, very beginning decided it would have cooperative education, a form of work integrated learning, in its programming. So we are now the largest of its kind, doing this kind of cooperative education programming with 25,000 students every year from 127 academic disciplines, by the way, out doing paid work terms globally, as well as across Canada. But my point in saying this is it does take time, and it's good to start somewhere and then let it happen. And it won't happen overnight for sure, but where there's a will, there's a way.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, so that's a very nice thought. I think with that, we can close this conversation. And also, we would like to be in touch with you to learn more. And also maybe, request our audience also, as I said, to reach out to you for any such requirement if they're interested to know more. Thank you so much, Dr. Norah, for giving us your time today. And it is really nice to learn so many things about your initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's lovely to be here.